I watched 3 guys block every exit in that room, and I knew this was the moment I'd either break or become someone they'd never see coming. My name is Ainsley Fletcher, and I'm 28 years old. For 6 years, I sat behind a desk in Navy intelligence, analyzing combat situations that other people lived through. I was good at my job, really good, but something was missing. I wanted to feel alive again. I wanted to prove that I could handle myself in the real world, not just on a computer screen. So 3 months ago, I took a job at Bridgeway Security Solutions in Virginia, a private military contractor that trains corporate security teams. I should probably tell you about the most important person in my life first. My uncle, Captain Boone Fletcher, is 54 years old and a retired Navy SEAL. He's the reason I'm still standing today, literally and figuratively. When I was 12, my parents died in a car accident on Interstate 95 during a winter storm. Uncle Boone took me in without hesitation. He never had kids of his own, never married, dedicated his whole life to the teams. But he made me his project, his student, his purpose. He didn't just raise me. He trained me to survive. Uncle Boone taught me something that most people never understand about Navy SEALs. They're not just warriors. They're strategists. He'd say this thing over and over while we were training in his garage back in North Carolina. Ainsley, physical strength loses to strategic thinking every single time. Make them underestimate you, then use their confidence against them. I heard those words so many times growing up that they became part of my DNA. At Bridgeway, I was one of 2 women in a 40-person training facility. The work was intense, exactly what I wanted. Close quarters combat training, tactical scenario planning, high-stress simulations. Most of the guys were professionals, former military like me, just trying to do their jobs and collect a paycheck. But there were 3 men who made it clear from day one that they didn't think I belonged there. Trevor Caston was the ringleader. 32 years old, ex-Marine, built like he spent every free moment in the gym. He had this way of looking at you that made your skin crawl, like he was constantly sizing you up and finding you lacking. His right-hand man was Rex Donovan, 30 years old, loyal to Trevor like a dog to its master. Rex never had an original thought in his life, just followed Trevor's lead and laughed at all his jokes. Then there was Wade Kimball, 29, the quietest of the 3, but somehow the most unsettling. Wade watched everything, calculated everything, never spoke unless he had something cutting to say. 3 weeks into my job, everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening, and most people had cleared out of the facility. I was in the equipment room, restocking training gear, when Trevor appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame with his arms crossed, blocking my exit without making it obvious. "Hey, Fletcher," he said, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. "You Navy intelligence girls know how to handle real pressure, or did you just push papers your whole career?" I forced myself to smile, to keep my voice light. "I handled enough to know when someone's trying to get a rise out of me." Rex and Wade appeared behind him, laughing like Trevor had just delivered the punchline of the century. The equipment room suddenly felt very small, very isolated. I grabbed my bag and walked toward the door, keeping my movements calm and deliberate. Trevor stepped aside at the last second, but not before getting close enough that I could smell his cheap cologne. That night, I called Uncle Boone. I didn't tell him exactly what happened, because I didn't want him to worry, but he could hear it in my voice. "Something wrong, kiddo?" he asked. "Just adjusting," I said. "It's different being in the field instead of behind a desk." There was a pause, and then he said something that stuck with me. "Ainsley, if something doesn't feel right, trust that instinct. Your gut has kept more SEALs alive than any weapon ever did." The next morning, I reported the incident to my supervisor, Logan Marsh. He was 45, former Army, the kind of guy who talked about the good old days when men were men and nobody complained about anything. I told him exactly what happened, how uncomfortable Trevor made me feel, how deliberate it seemed. Logan barely looked up from his paperwork. "Fletcher, these guys are just testing you. It's how this world works. You want to make it here, you need to toughen up." "I am tough," I said, keeping my voice steady. "That's not what this is about." He finally looked at me, and his expression said everything I needed to know. "Trevor's one of our best trainers. Rex and Wade have spotless records. You've been here 3 weeks. I'm not saying you're lying, but maybe you're misreading the situation." I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt since my parents died. Alone. completely and utterly alone. 2 days later, on a Thursday afternoon, Logan called me into his office. "I'm assigning you to a special scenario training tonight. Building C, 6 p.m. Trevor's going to run you through some advanced defensive tactics." My stomach dropped. "Just me?" "You're the one who needs the extra work according to your eval scores." He handed me a file. Trevor volunteered to stay late. "You should be grateful." I looked at the assignment sheet. Building C was an older structure on the edge of the facility, used for high-stress simulations. It was also the only building without updated security cameras. Everyone knew that. I texted Uncle Boone on my way out. "Situation developing. Might need your advice soon." His response came immediately. "I'm here, always." At exactly 6 p.m., I walked into Building C. The lights were dim, the hallways empty. I could hear voices coming from the main training room at the end of the corridor. As I got closer, I recognized them. Trevor, Rex, Wade, all three of them. I pushed open the door and Trevor turned around with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "There she is. Marsh thought you needed some extra attention on your defensive tactics. Lucky for you, I brought backup." Rex stood near the west exit. Wade leaned against the east door. Trevor blocked the main entrance behind me. Every exit was covered. That's when I knew. This wasn't training. This was something else entirely. They'd planned this, orchestrated it, made sure we'd be alone in the one building where nobody would see what happened. Trevor cracked his knuckles and stepped forward. "Let's see what you're really made of, Fletcher." And that's when Uncle Boone's voice filled my head, clear as if he was standing right beside me. "SEALs don't panic. They assess. They adapt. They act. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in that room. Because none of this makes sense without understanding who I was before Bridgeway and why this job meant everything to me. For 6 years, I worked in Navy intelligence at a facility outside Washington, D.C. My days consisted of analyzing satellite imagery, decoding intercepted communications, and building threat assessments for operations I'd never be part of. I was good at it. My commanding officers told me I had a gift for pattern recognition, for seeing connections that other analysts missed. I helped prevent 3 potential attacks on U.S. assets overseas and contributed to operations that I'll never be allowed to talk about. On paper, my career was impressive, but every single day, I felt like I was watching life happen to other people. I'd sit in that windowless office, staring at screens showing combat zones halfway across the world, and wonder what it felt like to actually be there, to make split-second decisions, to trust your training when everything was falling apart. The analysts around me seemed perfectly content with our role, but I felt like I was suffocating. I was 28 years old, and I'd never tested myself in any real way. Uncle Boone understood. When I called him last year and told him I was thinking about leaving intelligence, he didn't try to talk me out of it. "You've got your mother's restlessness," he said. She could never sit still either. "Drove your dad crazy, but it's what made her special." My mother died when I was 12, so my memories of her are fractured and incomplete. But Uncle Boone kept her alive for me through stories. He'd tell me how she'd been a paramedic, how she'd run toward emergencies when everyone else ran away. My father had been a high school teacher, steady and calm, the perfect balance to her intensity. They died together on a snowy February night when their car slid into oncoming traffic on Interstate 95. Uncle Boone got the call at 2 in the morning. He was stationed in Virginia Beach at the time, running training exercises for new SEAL candidates. He drove through the night to get to me in North Carolina. I remember waking up in my bedroom and seeing him standing in the doorway in his uniform. His face completely expressionless in that way military people have when they're delivering the worst news of your life. He moved me into his house 3 days after the funeral. He didn't ask if I wanted to come. He just packed my things and brought me home. For the first few months, I barely spoke. I'd sit in his garage while he worked out, watching him go through his training routines in silence. He never pushed me to talk or process or grieve in any particular way. He just let me exist in the same space as him. Then one day, about 4 months after my parents died, I asked him to teach me what he was doing. I was 12 years old and barely 90 pounds, but something in me needed to feel strong. Uncle Boone looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, kiddo, but we do this right. No shortcuts. For the next 6 years, until I left for college, Uncle Boone trained me. Not like some weekend self-defense class, but real training. He taught me hand-to-hand combat, situational awareness, tactical thinking. He'd create scenarios in the backyard, making me solve problems under pressure. He never went easy on me because I was a girl or because I'd lost my parents. He treated me like any SEAL candidate because he said that's what I'd asked for. But the most important thing Uncle Boone taught me wasn't physical. He taught me how to think like a SEAL. He'd say the same thing over and over during our training sessions. Ainsley, anyone can learn to throw a punch. What separates SEALs from everyone else is what happens up here. He'd tap his temple. We don't react, we assess. We find the angle nobody else sees. We turn our opponent's strength into their weakness. Those lessons stayed with me through college, through my enlistment in the Navy, through 6 years of intelligence work. But I'd never really tested them in a real situation. I'd never been cornered. I'd never faced an actual threat where my training was the only thing standing between me and something terrible. When I interviewed at Bridgeway Security Solutions 3 months ago, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Excitement. The facility was impressive. All state-of-the-art training equipment and former military personnel who actually knew what they were doing. The recruiter told me they were specifically looking to diversify their training staff, that they wanted more women in leadership positions. I should have asked why they needed to diversify. I should have wondered what kind of culture required a conscious effort to include women. But I was so hungry for something real, something challenging, that I didn't ask the right questions. My first day at Bridgeway was exactly what I'd hoped for. Intense physical training, tactical scenario planning, real problems that required real solutions. The other woman on staff, Jenna Cardwell, was friendly but distant. During lunch that first week, I tried to connect with her. "How long have you been here?" I asked. 2 years, she said, not making eye contact. "Listen, some advice. Keep your head down, do your work, don't make waves. What do you mean?" She finally looked at me directly. "Just trust me on this." I didn't understand what she meant until I met Trevor, Rex, and Wade. They were a unit within the larger training staff, always together, always watching. Trevor ran most of the close-quarters combat training, and he was legitimately skilled. I watched him demonstrate techniques that were textbook perfect. But there was something else there, too. Something underneath the professionalism that felt wrong. Standing in Building C with Trevor, Rex, and Wade blocking every exit, I felt my training kick in automatically. My heart rate spiked, but my mind cleared. Uncle Boone always said that fear is just information, and right now, my body was telling me I was in serious danger. Trevor rolled his shoulders back and grinned. "Marsh said you needed work on your defensive tactics. So let's start with some basic grappling techniques." He moved toward me fast, faster than a training demonstration required. His hands went for my shoulders, and I stepped back, creating distance. Rex laughed from his position near the west door. "Come on, Fletcher. You can't learn if you keep backing away," Trevor said. For the next 20 minutes, they ran me through drills that felt less like training and more like assault. Trevor would demonstrate a takedown by slamming me against the padded wall with excessive force. When I tried to execute the counter-move, he'd block it and use the opportunity to get his hands on me in ways that had nothing to do with proper technique. His grip on my wrists lasted too long. When he demonstrated a rear restraint, he pressed against me in a way that made my skin crawl. "You're too tense," he said, his breath hot against my ear. "You need to relax into it." I pulled away and turned to face him. "I think I've got it now. Can we move on?" Wade spoke up from the east door, his voice quiet and measured. "We've got all night, Fletcher. Marsh said to make sure you really understand the material. All night." The words hung in the air like a threat. I tried a different approach. "Actually, I'm not feeling well. I think I should head out and we can reschedule." Trevor stepped directly in front of me. "Training's not over. Besides, you're the one who complained about not getting enough hands-on experience, right? That's what you told Marsh?" I never said that. He was twisting everything, building a narrative where I'd asked for this extra attention. Rex moved closer, no longer pretending to just observe. "Yeah, didn't you say the other day that intelligence work left you soft? That you needed to toughen up?" They were coordinating their story, making sure their version of events would hold up if I tried to report this. 3 men against 1 woman, and they'd all swear I'd begged for additional training. Trevor grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the center of the mat. Let's try that takedown again. This time actually resist. I jerked my arm free. Don't grab me like that. Like what? His face was all innocence. That's the technique. How are you supposed to learn defensive tactics if I don't put you in realistic scenarios? Wade pushed off from the wall and walked toward us. She's right though, Trevor. Maybe you're being too gentle. Real attackers don't ask permission. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. This was the moment I realized they'd planned every word, every movement. They'd probably discussed it over beers, figured out exactly how to corner me in a way that would seem like legitimate training if anyone ever asked questions. My phone was in my bag near the door where Rex stood. The emergency call button on the wall was behind Wade. Trevor was blocking my path to the main exit. They'd positioned themselves perfectly, like this was a tactical operation. You know what? I said, forcing my voice to stay level. I reported you once, Trevor. I can report this too. Trevor's smile widened. Report what? That 3 trainers stayed late to help you with skills you're clearly lacking? Go ahead. Marsh already thinks you're oversensitive. Corporate will think you're trying to get attention, Rex added. Plus, you already cried wolf once. Nobody believes the girl who keeps making accusations she can't prove. My hands were shaking now, and I hated that they could see it. I hated that my body was betraying my fear when I needed to appear strong. Uncle Boone's voice echoed in my head, something he'd said during one of our garage training sessions when I was 16. Ainsley, predators look for easy victims. The second you show them you're not easy, most of them back down. But some of them, the really dangerous ones, they see resistance as a challenge. Trevor was the dangerous kind. He moved closer, invading my space again. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to finish this training session. You're going to learn what we teach you. And tomorrow, you're going to thank Marsh for arranging this extra attention. Because if you don't, if you go running to HR again with your complaints, we'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of employee you really are. And what kind is that? My voice came out steadier than I felt. The kind who can't handle the pressure. The kind who sleeps her way into positions she's not qualified for. The kind who makes false accusations when things don't go her way. Trevor's eyes were cold now, all pretense of friendliness gone. Your uncle's reputation won't protect you here, Fletcher. Nobody cares that you're Captain Boone Fletcher's little pet project. That's when everything crystallized for me. This wasn't just about intimidation or even assault. This was about destroying me completely, making sure I couldn't fight back without destroying myself in the process. Section 4. The turning point. Decision or action taken. Expanded, something shifted inside me when Trevor mentioned Uncle Boone. It was like a switch flipped from panic to clarity. These men had researched me, studied me, found my pressure points. They knew exactly what they were doing. But they'd made one critical mistake. They assumed that being Boone Fletcher's niece made me soft, protected, someone who'd never really been tested. They had no idea what he'd actually taught me. I forced my shoulders to drop, made my body language smaller and more submissive. Uncle Boone had drilled this into me 1,000 times during our training sessions. The best fighters in the world know how to lose before they know how to win. Make your opponent think they've already won, and they'll drop their guard. I took a shaky breath, and I didn't have to fake the tremor in my voice. You're right. I'm sorry. I overreacted when I reported you. I was just trying to prove myself, and I took everything the wrong way. Trevor's posture relaxed slightly. Rex and Wade exchanged glances that said they'd known I'd break eventually. This was exactly what they'd wanted, what they'd planned for. A scared woman apologizing for daring to challenge them. That's more like it, Trevor said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. See, this is what happens when you stop fighting and start learning. I nodded and moved toward the center of the mat, keeping my hands visible and non-threatening. My mind was racing through everything Uncle Boone had taught me, every scenario we'd practiced. He'd never just taught me how to fight. He'd taught me how to think 3 moves ahead, how to turn a disadvantage into an advantage. When I was 15, Uncle Boone had created this drill where he'd have his SEAL buddies corner me in the garage. 3 or 4 grown men, all trained killers surrounding a teenage girl. The first few times I'd panicked and tried to fight my way out. I'd fail every single time. Then Uncle Boone taught me the real lesson. Ainsley, you can't outfight 3 men. You can't outrun them. So what can you do? I don't know, I'd said, frustrated and exhausted. You outsmart them. You make them commit to an action that leaves them vulnerable. You create chaos and you exploit it. Standing in Building C with Trevor, Rex, and Wade, I finally understood what he'd been preparing me for all those years. I scanned the room while pretending to be defeated. There was a heavy equipment bag about 6 feet to my left, near where Rex stood. Wade had his weight shifted onto his left leg, probably an old injury he was compensating for. Trevor was overconfident now, chest puffed out, thinking he'd broken me. Can we just finish this drill so I can go home? I asked, letting defeat color my voice. Trevor stepped closer and I could see the victory in his eyes. He thought this was over. Sure, let's run through that rear restraint one more time. But this time, I want you to really try to break free. Show me you actually learned something tonight. Okay, I said quietly. Can you show me the starting position again? I want to make sure I understand it correctly. This was the bait. I was asking him to demonstrate, to put himself in a position where he'd be focused on showing off his technique rather than defending himself. Trevor was too arrogant to see the trap. Fine, he said, moving behind me. The key is controlling the shoulders and maintaining close contact. Like this. His hands gripped my shoulders and he pressed against my back. Every instinct in my body screamed to fight right then, but I forced myself to wait. Uncle Boone's voice was crystal clear in my head. Timing beats speed. Precision beats strength. Patience beats aggression. Rex and Wade had relaxed even more now. They thought the dangerous moment had passed. They thought I'd submitted. Wade had actually pulled out his phone and was checking messages. Rex was leaning against the wall. Now when I say go, try to break free using the technique I showed you, Trevor said, his voice right next to my ear. I nodded. My heart was hammering, but my breathing was controlled. I'd done this drill hundreds of times with Uncle Boone. I knew exactly what needed to happen in the next 3 seconds. But I also knew that physical tactics alone wouldn't be enough. These men had created a situation where, even if I defended myself successfully, they'd twisted into me attacking them. I needed more than just an escape. I needed evidence. I needed witnesses. I needed to flip this entire situation so completely that they couldn't spin their way out of it. That's when I remembered something else Uncle Boone had taught me, something he'd learned in his years as a SEAL. The best operators aren't the ones who can fight their way out of anything. They're the ones who make sure they never have to fight in the first place. Intelligence, documentation, preparation, those win more battles than bullets ever will. My phone was recording in my pocket. I turned on the voice memo app the second I'd walked into Building C, a habit Uncle Boone had drilled into me after the first incident with Trevor. Every word they'd said tonight was documented. Every threat, every admission, but I needed more than that. I needed to make them reveal their full plan, their complete intent. I needed them to hang themselves with their own words. Before we start, I said, my voice small and defeated, I just want to make sure I understand. If I do this training right, if I stop complaining, we're good? You'll tell Marsh I'm doing better? Trevor's grip on my shoulders tightened. That depends on how cooperative you are, Fletcher. Not just tonight. Going forward, there it was. The explicit threat. The confirmation that this was never about training. Trevor's hands were still on my shoulders when I made my move. I didn't wait for his signal. I dropped into a crouch so fast that his grip slipped, throwing him off balance. Before he could recover, I swept my leg hard against his front ankle while driving my shoulder into his knee. It was a technique Uncle Boone had made me practice until I could do it in my sleep. Trevor went down hard, his back slamming against the mat with a sound that echoed through the empty building. Rex pushed off the wall, his eyes going wide. I kicked the heavy equipment bag with everything I had. It slid across the floor and crashed into his shins. He stumbled forward, arms windmilling as he tried to catch his balance. Wade was faster than I expected. He dropped his phone and lunged toward me, but I was already moving. I used Trevor's fallen body as a barrier between us and grabbed a training staff from the wall rack. When Wade's hand reached for my arm, I struck the pressure point on his inner forearm exactly where Uncle Boone had shown me. His fingers went numb instantly and his hand dropped. The whole sequence took maybe 5 seconds. 3 men neutralized. Not because I was stronger than them, but because I'd been faster and smarter. But here's where Uncle Boone's real lesson came into play. I didn't keep fighting. I didn't press my advantage. I stepped back, dropped the training staff, and pulled out my phone. Building C, Thursday night, 6:47 p.m. 3 men, 1 woman, no supervisor present, I said clearly, my voice steady now. Want to explain this situation to the review board? Trevor scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You think anyone's going to believe your version of what happened here? You just attacked 3 trainers, did I? I held up my phone. Because I've been recording audio since the moment I walked into this building. Every word you said, every threat you made, every time you touched me inappropriately during what you claimed was legitimate training. The room went completely silent. I watched the realization dawn on Rex's face first, then Wade's. Trevor's jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. You're bluffing, Wade said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? You want me to play it back? The part where you said you had all night? Or maybe the part where Trevor threatened to destroy my reputation if I reported this? Or how about the part where Rex said nobody would believe me because I'd already cried wolf? Trevor took a step toward me, his hands balling into fists. Give me that phone. I wouldn't do that if I were you, I said. Because if you take one more step, you're going to have a much bigger problem than an audio recording. That's when Rex noticed it. His eyes went to the corner of the room, to the camera that everyone knew was broken and non-functional. Except tonight, there was a small red light glowing beneath the lens. The camera, Rex whispered. I followed his gaze and allowed myself a small smile. You thought I just reported Trevor once and hoped for the best? I reported him 3 times through 3 different channels. When Marsh dismissed my first complaint, I contacted the corporate compliance officer directly. When she started asking questions, Trevor's behavior became a liability worth monitoring. Wade's face had gone pale. That camera's been broken for 6 months. It was broken, I corrected. The compliance team had it repaired and hardwired 2 days ago. They've been watching Trevor's training sessions all week, documenting his behavior. Tonight was just giving him enough rope to hang himself. Trevor's expression shifted from anger to something closer to panic. That's entrapment. You set us up. I documented a pattern of harassment and assault. There's a difference. The door opened behind Wade and he jumped. Logan Marsh walked in, followed by 2 security officers and a woman in a sharp corporate suit who I'd never seen before. She had the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention. We've seen and heard enough, the woman said, her voice cold and professional. She looked at Trevor, Rex, and Wade. I'm Vera Stockton, Regional Director of Operations. You 3 are terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out. You'll receive formal notice of our investigation and potential criminal charges within 48 hours. Trevor's face went red. You can't do this. We were just training her. She attacked us. Vera pulled out a tablet and turned it toward him. On the screen was footage from the past 30 minutes, crystal clear video with audio. This is what training looks like to you? Blocking exits, making explicit threats, inappropriate physical contact. We have everything, Mr. Caston. Every word, every action. Logan Marsh looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Vera turned to him next. You're suspended pending investigation into your handling of Ms. Fletcher's initial complaints. We'll determine your future with this company after a full review. The security officers moved forward. Rex went quietly, his head down. Wade stared at me with pure hatred as they led him out. Trevor stopped at the door and looked back. Your uncle must be so proud, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He is, I replied. He taught me that Navy SEALs don't just know how to fight. They know how to win. And winning means being 3 steps ahead before the battle even starts. After they left, Vera approached me. Ms. Fletcher, I apologize that it took this long to address the situation. When you contacted our compliance office, we needed time to build a proper case. Are you all right? My hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, but I nodded. I'm okay. What you did tonight took tremendous courage and strategic thinking. We'd like to discuss a new position with you if you're interested. Corporate security oversight. We need people who understand how to identify and prevent exactly this kind of toxic culture. I looked around Building C, at the room where I'd almost become another silent victim. "I'd like that," I said. I sat in my car in the Bridgeway parking lot for 20 minutes after everything ended, just breathing. My hands were still shaking and I couldn't seem to make them stop. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was gone, leaving behind the reality of what had almost happened. What would have happened if I hadn't been prepared? I pulled out my phone and called Uncle Boone. He answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting. "Kiddo." His voice was warm but concerned. "You okay?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat closed up and tears burned behind my eyes. Not tears of sadness or fear, but of release. Of finally being able to let go of the tension I'd been carrying for weeks. "It's done," I managed to say. "It worked exactly like you said it would." There was a pause, and I could hear him exhale slowly. "Tell me what happened." I walked him through the entire night, from the moment I entered Building C to watching security escort Trevor, Rex, and Wade out of the facility. Uncle Boone didn't interrupt once. He just listened the way he always did, giving me space to process everything out loud. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You did exactly what you needed to do, Ainsley. You didn't let them make you a victim, and you didn't let anger make you reckless. That's the SEAL way. Precision, patience, and proof," my voice cracked. "I was so scared, Uncle Boone. For a minute there, when they had all the exits blocked, I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe I should have just quit after the first incident." "Fear's natural," he said firmly. "What you do with it is what determines who you become. You used yours to stay sharp. You turned it into fuel instead of letting it paralyze you. Your parents would be so proud of you right now. I know I am." I wiped my eyes, not caring that I was crying in a parking lot. "When did you call your friend in corporate risk management?" "The day after you told me about the first incident with Trevor," Uncle Boone admitted. "You tried to play it off like it was nothing, but I've known you since you were 12 years old. I can hear things in your voice that you don't say out loud. I made a call to Marcus Thornton, guy I served with who works in corporate security consulting. He connected me with the right people at Bridgeway. They started their investigation quietly." "So you've been watching this whole time?" "Not watching. Trusting. There's a difference. I knew you could handle yourself. I just made sure you had backup if things went sideways. That's what we do for the people we love. We give them the tools, and then we trust them to use those tools when it matters." I drove home that night thinking about everything Uncle Boone had taught me over the years. The physical training was important, sure. Knowing how to defend myself had literally saved me tonight. But the real lesson, the one that made the difference, was about strategic thinking, about documentation and preparation, about fighting smarter instead of harder. 2 months later, I was sitting in my new office in the Corporate Security Oversight Division. Vera Stockton had been true to her word. My new role involved reviewing training protocols, investigating complaints, and implementing systems to prevent the kind of toxic culture that had nearly destroyed me. The first thing I did was create a confidential third-party reporting system. Employees could now report harassment or assault to an external firm that specialized in workplace investigations. No more having to trust that your supervisor would take you seriously. No more having to navigate internal politics while trying to stay safe. I also redesigned the training facility assignments. No more isolated sessions in buildings without cameras. No more one-on-one training without documented approval and supervision. Every scenario was logged, every session recorded, every trainer held accountable. Within those 2 months, 3 more women joined the Bridgeway training program. One of them was Jenna Cardwell's younger sister, Melissa. Jenna stopped me in the hallway one afternoon, her eyes wet. "Thank you," she said simply. "I should have done what you did years ago. I should have fought back. But I was too scared of losing my job." "You're not responsible for their behavior," I told her. "They created that environment. We're just making sure it can't exist anymore." The charges against Trevor, Rex, and Wade moved forward. The audio recording and video footage made the case airtight. They all took plea deals to avoid trial. Trevor got 18 months, Rex and Wade got probation and restraining orders. Logan Marsh was fired and quietly left the industry. I kept a photo of Uncle Boone in his SEAL uniform on my desk. On the back, in his handwriting, were the words he'd written when I graduated from basic training. "Don't fight harder. Fight smarter. That philosophy didn't just save my career, it potentially saved my life. And now I was making sure that no other woman at Bridgeway would ever walk into a room alone and realize all the exits were blocked. 3 months after everything happened, I led my first training session in the main facility. 40 people sat in that room, including a dozen women. I stood at the front and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just confidence, but purpose. Today we're going to talk about tactical awareness, I began. Not just physical tactics, but strategic thinking. Because the best defense isn't about being the strongest person in the room. It's about being the smartest. I caught sight of myself in the mirrored wall and barely recognized the woman looking back. She stood taller. She spoke with authority. She'd been tested in the worst way possible and she'd won, not through violence but through preparation and intelligence. Uncle Boone's lessons had given me more than survival skills. They'd given me the blueprint for changing an entire system. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting back in the moment. It's trusting yourself enough to build a case, document everything, and let justice work when you've stacked the odds in your favor. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And I was making sure the next woman who walked through Bridgeway's doors would never have to feel what I felt in Building C that night.